let's talk about two figures from history whose lives were on a total collision course. One was an emperor who literally ruled the known world. The other, an apostle who would end up changing it forever. And their story, believe it or not, raises a really powerful question about the paths we choose for ourselves today. And wow, the contrast between them couldn't be more stark. I mean, look at this. On one side, you've got Emperor Nero, a man obsessed with wealth, glamour, and power, who eventually just declared himself a god. And on the other side, the Apostle Paul, a man whose life took such a sharp turn that he ended up calling himself the worst of all sinners. It's hard to even imagine two more opposite ways of seeing yourself. All right, so let's dive into that first path, the world of Emperor Nero. This is a story all about an insatiable, all-consuming lust for power, and it was shaped by the crazy times he lived in. So you've got to picture the world that made Nero who he was. We're talking about a Roman culture that was just totally hedonistic. It was all about this relentless chase for more wealth, more glamour. And for a guy like Nero, that just poured gasoline on his ambition for absolute political power. He was completely ruthless in getting rid of anyone who dared to stand in his way. And this is where his ambition took a really, really dark turn. The source material points out that Nero was actually the first person to call the followers of the Way by the name Christians, and he meant it as an insult. His persecution of them was just horrendous. He would literally light up the Roman knights by using their burning bodies on crosses. It's absolutely chilling. And here's what's so wild about it. Throughout his entire reign of terror, through this whole quest for ultimate power, Nero never once stopped to think about what he was doing. He never had a moment of reflection. He never, ever questioned his path. So where did this unwavering path of a self-proclaimed god lead him? Suicide. A stark, lonely end for a man who demanded the entire world worship him. Okay, now let's completely switch gears and look at our second path. We're now looking at a man who actually started out with a similar kind of intensity, a similar zeal, but his life took a completely different fork in the road. You see, before he was the famous Apostle Paul, he was a guy named Saul of Tarsus. He was a deeply devout Pharisee, and, just like Nero, he was a persecutor. But here's the huge difference. Saul genuinely thought he was doing the right thing. He believed he was defending his faith by wiping out this group he saw as a dangerous threat. And this is where his life just completely flips upside down. He starts out as this zealous persecutor, but then, on the road to Damascus, everything changes. He hears the voice of Jesus, and he has this stunning, world-shattering realization. The very people he'd been hunting down were actually followers of the Messiah he'd been waiting for his whole life. That single moment completely redefines him, and Saul the persecutor becomes Paul the apostle. I mean, can you just imagine that for a second? The sheer weight of that realization, that he had missed the Messiah, it was so heavy that it became his new identity. He didn't see himself as a god or some righteous leader. No, he saw himself as the greatest of all sinners, saved by the very one he had been trying to destroy. And that's why, unlike Nero, whose legacy pretty much just ended with his own death, Paul's legacy became one of enduring hope. His incredible transformation sent a message that no one is beyond redemption. So, okay, an emperor and an apostle from 2,000 years ago. Why are we talking about this now? What does this ancient story have to do with us? Well, that brings us to the real heart of it all, why their paths matter so much right here, right now. Well, the thing is, if you look around today, you start to see echoes of this exact same story playing out all over the place. Whether it's in politics, in our careers, even in our social media feeds. We see a world just filled with these constant struggles for power and this feeling, that hope is kind of lost. And it forces us to ask ourselves some pretty tough questions, doesn't it? What are the modern versions of Nero's ambition? What kind of power or status or recognition are we chasing so desperately? And that leads to the biggest question of all, the one that ties everything back to Paul's journey. In our own chase for power and control, what essential truth might we be completely missing? Just like Saul did right before everything changed on that road to Damascus. And this all points to a pretty radical final idea. The source suggests that real freedom isn't found in always being right, but in having the humility to actually challenge what we think we know. The source makes this really interesting point here. It argues that truth isn't some religion that puts you in chains. It's actually the very thing that sets you free. It's all about having the courage to break away from our rigid belief systems and go searching for a deeper understanding. Okay, check out this example from the source because it'll really make you think. We've all heard that Jesus was a carpenter, right? But if you actually look at the original Greek and the local geography, the source points out there was almost no wood to build with in that region. It was all stone. Jesus was a stonemason. Now, if a belief that common can be wrong, it really makes you wonder, what else might we be completely mistaken about? Which brings us to this really provocative piece of advice from a biblical scholar mentioned in the source. He basically says, start with the assumption that you're wrong about everything. Now, that's not about being cynical. It's about opening yourself up to a genuine, humble search for what's actually true. And so, in the end, it all boils down to this, doesn't it? As we live our own lives, with our own struggles for power and for meaning, we're all faced with a choice between these two paths. Is our legacy going to be defined by the power we manage to hold on to, or by the hope we decide to give away?